Hello and welcome to American Friction, the US politics podcast that's like, whatever. Am I Jacob Jarvis?
Not sure, but I think I'm Chris Jones.
I hope you are. And joining us is, we believe, Nikki McCann Ramirez, if that is your real name.
Who's to say?
And today we have a special guest. We've called in the cavalry, haven't we?
We have. We have Asawin Suebsaeng, a senior political reporter at Rolling Stone, covering the modern American conservative movement and GOP. Swin, welcome to American Friction.
Thank you so much for having me.
So on this show, we're going to discuss how Trump is turning America into a police state. Nice, happy stuff, as always. Plus, there's more. We'll wrap up other stories you might have missed and answer listener questions. But before that, Chris, it is that time of the week.
It is.
Ask us a silly question.
Okay, I'll kind of swerve away from politics this week.
Okay,
because it's been a lot, hasn't it? With all the LA stuff, it's been pretty rough. So my question this week is around zombies.
Okay, cool.
Which I know you like.
Yeah.
And also, you sent me something earlier in the day about Leicester City Council, which is where we're from. We've covered that patch for a long time. And they kind of, but also don't kind of, have a zombie apocalypse plan in place, which is wild. And also 28 days, or is it 28 weeks later? It's coming out soon.
Years.
28 years? How many are there? Well, Three there. I said them all. Anyway, my question to everyone this week is, if there was a zombie apocalypse tomorrow, where would you choose to hide? Where would you make your base? Jarv, I'll start with you, because you've obviously thought about this for your entire life.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong person by the fact you're asking the too right person. I've really thought about this. A school is the smartest place to go, really.
Oh, is it?
Because there's going to be food there's going to be supplies. If the internet's down, there's going to be books you can use to research stuff. There'll be medical supplies there.
Right.
Sports equipment you could use as sort of makeshift weapons. Probably some sort of DIY kit.
Right.
And stuff like that. And people are going to have already gone to hospitals. And you want to avoid them because they've turned into zombies at this point. So, yeah.
Right.
A school. But no one do that because that's what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Right, okay. So the hospitals are overrun already, are they?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So school, you're going with school. Nikki, what about you?
The Bass Pro Shop Pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee.
Nice.
The what?
Yeah.
You know, the big pyramid
It's great.
shop.
It has guns, it has ammo, it has medical supplies, it has a great selection of snacks. Highly defendable.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
Swin, yourself?
I would hope that I would be in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and I would hunker down at this famous, at least in the district, apartment complex called The Woodner. I used to live there.
Okay.
My wife and I used to live there. I highly recommend your listeners and viewers give it a Google, because it is very much the Forrest Gump of buildings in Washington, D.C. It has a cameo in the Watergate scandal. I believe Duke Ellington used to perform on the rooftop there back when it was a hotel. Seriously, the Woodner. Read about it. It's a fascinating building. And also highly fortified.
I've seen it, and it's U-shaped, so it is very defendable because you do have sort of a natural gulf into which you can corral your enemy and then just shoot from above.
Nice.
Chris, you're probably not going to have as interesting an answer as that, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Well, you stole mine, actually. I was
really?
going to say school. But also, my second is any fast food restaurant with a 360 view and a roof.
Okay.
But also, isn't zombies taking over, England, the plot of Shaun of the Dead? The answer for both of you should be a pub.
Yeah,
well,
wrong answer.
It didn't go very well,
You end
though.
up in a basement and then you're fucked.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We all saw what happened to Nick Frost in that, and let's be honest, I would be the first to go
Yeah.
for
Well,
those hungry zombies.
On that
But anyway,
note,
yeah, should we get on with it?
Let's, please.
This is American Friction. Welcome.
Okay, this is an appeal, a call out to all of you listening. We need your support to keep on going. We love making the show, but it ain't cheap. It really isn't cheap. It's coming out of our pockets. So that's why we need backing on Patreon to keep on keeping on.
Yeah, that's right. For as little as £3 a month, you'll get the show ad-free, and other tiers will definitely get you access to bonus content and merch. I don't know why I said it like that, but you will. And if you decide to sign up to the £5 a month or more tier, we have a Patreon chat community where you can definitely ask questions to us and each other so that we can talk through the madness that is US politics.
I like that you believe we're so uncredible, you have to say definitely, as if people are not
we've been talking
expecting to
about
trust us.
a rug pull for weeks now, so...
I know. We might have to do one.
Yeah.
Anyway, go to patreon.com/American Friction to sign up. There is a link in the show notes. There really is. Right, on to the show. Nikki, is it extreme to call America a police state yet?
I mean, the retention walls are failing. There's two levels here. The United States has been a police state for a while, in the sense that local law enforcement for the past around 2 decades has been essentially turned into like baby military forces. Like, you see, if you like paid attention during the 2020 protests, which I really hope both of you were, or have seen sort of cities react to protests, to public movements in the last decade, longer, you'll see that the police in the United States are hyper-militarized. They have access to equipment that, when you think of sort of like your cartoonish stereotypical version of a policeman with like the little whistle and the baton, we're talking about members of like the NYPD, the LAPD. I mean, you see it all the time in Washington, D.C., which has like 4 different law enforcement agencies in like any given time. The police in the United States look increasingly like the military. So in the sense that we have an overpowered law enforcement force distributed throughout the country, that like the primary purpose of which is sort of to crack down on the populace as a whole. Like, yes, the US is a police state. What is happening now is slightly different in the sense that the boundaries between those like local police forces, those local law enforcement agencies, however militarized that they might be, the boundary between them and the actual like military armed forces that are under the direct control of the president, those lines are being blurred. What we've seen in LA, and Swin can speak to this much more in depth than I can, is over the last like week or so, we have essentially seen Trump come as close as he possibly can to deputizing the National Guard and the military to act as civilian law enforcement, which, as we talked about in the bonus episode this week, he can't legally do unless he invokes the Insurrection Act. But at this point, it is a technicality. So that's kind of where we are right now. I think the United States has existed in some form of a police state for a pretty long time now, as well as like an insane surveillance state. That is now transforming into something much closer to like a relationship with the actual military than it ever has before.
Swin, what sort of thresholds do you think we've passed over the last week, which have changed the way we would describe the US and, you know, more likely call it a police state in the way people are discussing it now?
Well, what Donald Trump has wanted since his first term in office, and however atrocious, and it certainly was heavily atrocious, the first administration was, there were very selective, very fragile guardrails that kept him doing things like, say, invoking the Insurrection Act during the summer of 2020. If he had the MAGA infrastructure and the exact same staffing around him now, and the same people in the same places with the same turbocharged MAGAfied ideology that he has now, back then in the summer of 2020, I would be willing to place a lot of, shall we say, figurative money and bets on, no, there's no way the Insurrection Act would not have been invoked at the height of the mass protest movements and rioting in the summer of 2020. So there were moments where he really wanted to do really fascistic, really extremely hardcore military crackdown stuff like that. And he was bargained down for whatever reasons to kind of a squishier form of that. Now, all of that stuff is gone. He and his top lieutenants in this second administration have learned their lesson from the first 4 years, and that we are not going to do that. We are going to walk up as close to the line as we can, or if we feel like it, cross it. And by that, I mean, as Nikki was pointing out minutes earlier, he is sending in literal National Guard federal troops. You can see the photos and the videos on the streets and different federal property in Los Angeles. They're there standing with their gigantic, terrifying looking firearms. And on top of that, he and his former Fox News star, now actual Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, he and the president keep telling the American people and the people of Los Angeles that the literal Marines are right there on standby. I mean, it's not even mob speak at this point, where it's like, oh, what a fancy democracy, or what a nice store you got there. Shame if anything would happen to it. He's saying the Marines are there. If I feel like it, I can sick them on you, because there was a lot of freedom of expression and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly that Donald Trump did not like. That's why the Marines are there on standby in the Los Angeles area. And in my humble opinion, whether they are unleashed or not on American civilians today or tomorrow is almost immaterial to me, in the sense that it is already a scandal. It is already a moral atrocity. In our modern times, the president of the United States is not supposed to be allowed to do that, to use the US military as his personal plaything, because there was a bunch of assembly and speech from protesters that he did not like. And look, he and his administration are going to argue they are there for quote unquote riot control, or because someone threw a rock or someone set something on fire. Obviously, objectively speaking, that's not what this is, no matter whatever patina of street violence or whatever here or there justification they have, because as numerous people have pointed out, there are basically annual riots in different parts of California in the form of like spring break gatherings that have caused, I think, more damage and public taxpayer costs than we have already seen with what's going on with the anti-ICE demonstrations in Los Angeles in recent days. I don't recall Donald Trump or anybody else talking about federalizing National Guard troops, men and women, and sending them in for that. So no, this is Donald Trump trying to crack down on speech and dissidents and dissent that he does not like. And a armed ICE agent or a federal marshal or local law enforcement is not good enough for him. He has been long obsessed with using his military, as he likes to put it, to crack down on this stuff. So, like, have we had really dark, awful periods in American history and modern American history before that have at times felt like some aspects of what we're talking about right now? Sure. But this is, for a multitude of reasons, different, and is, in my humble assessment, as horrifying as we're making it sound right now, because all we're doing is accurately assessing what Donald Trump, in his own actions and in his own words, is doing.
Yeah. You mentioned the threat of sending in the Marines. There's also another threat of arresting Gavin Newsom over what's been happening in LA. Now, that looks like it's probably unlikely that it's going to happen, that Gavin Newsom will be arrested. But in a way, is it too hard to tell apart what are the real threats and what is just theater at the moment?
Look, you don't even have to talk about Gavin Newsom here. Donald Trump has used his perch of the Oval Office during this second increasingly authoritarian term in the White House to use the power of his federal position, the most powerful man in the world, to threaten people like Bruce Springsteen with criminal investigations, because Bruce Springsteen committed the crime of saying something on stage that Donald Trump didn't like.
Yeah.
The problem with Donald Trump is that there is oftentimes not a very distinct line between where his fantasy and his bluster and his bluffing ends and where his reality and actual substantive actions or policies begin. We've seen this play out so many times over the past decade, including, but certainly not limited to, what happened on January 6th during the deadly Capitol riot and insurrection that he himself instigated during his months-long effort to cling to power after losing the election to Joe Biden. Did he actually believe, quote unquote, that he had won the 2020 presidential election? Did he actually think that come late January 2021, he would still be sitting legitimately in the Oval Office? I mean, it didn't really matter. There are both evidence for the yes column and the no column on that. But at the end of the day, the outcome was the exact same for if he believed every single shred of rancid conspiracy theory that he and his people were spewing at the time. Because we all saw the literal blood that was spilled at the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. that day, and the blood that stained the people's house. So when people try to assess, like, okay, what of it is bluster and what of it is actual action, so often with President Trump and his top lieutenants, the line between the two things is intentionally blurred and frequently does not exist.
Yeah, and I want to note a couple things in relation to that are also happening this week in terms of like what is theater, what is bluster, and what is Trump actually using the American armed forces as like a plaything. I'm going to rewind to 2020 when we talk about like what the line between politicians doing just like rhetoric and like grandstanding is versus action. In 2020, Tom Cotton wrote an op-ed around the George Floyd protest, basically in the New York Times, that the headline was "Send in the troops." Tom Cotton was basically calling for Donald Trump to send the military to various locations where protests were breaking out, where they were getting violent. That caused such a scandal that the like editorial page of the new editor of the New York Times ended up having to resign. This week, Tom Cotton rewrote a version of that op-ed, "Send in the troops for real" this time. He published it in the Wall Street Journal this time around, I think. Trump is actually sending the troops to California, and it's a big deal. But no one at the Wall Street Journal is resigning now. We're still having discussions of like, oh, what does he mean? What is the line? And at the same time that you have the American president sending U.S. Marines to California to put down protests that are taking place in like 1 square mile of downtown Los Angeles, which is like a spot on the carpet compared to the size of the entire city. It's nothing close to what we've seen before in Los Angeles. You also have him going to Fort Bragg for an event celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, where he had enlisted service members laughing at his attacks on Joe Biden, booing the former president of the United States, which, forget about how you feel about Joe Biden. That's supposed to be a very clear violation of Department of Defense policy because the military does not exist to support the whims and antics of a president. It exists theoretically to protect the integrity and security of the United States, its citizenry, regardless of their politics. So the Department of Defense for a really long time has had strict policies about what political activities their service members can do. And then you have the president showing up to an event, cherry picking who gets to be on TV with him because they did like a whole bunch of screening about who could be on television with him, apparently. No fat soldiers was an email that was sent out. But then you have this very public display of the military booing a former president. And then in 2 days, he's going to throw himself a massive birthday military parade in Washington, D.C. And all of that looks like pageantry. It looks like Trump is just giving a campaign speech at Fort Bragg. Oh, other countries throw military parades. Why doesn't the U.S. throw military parades? But even though it looks like a show, like a big old stage production for Donald Trump, what it's actually doing is erasing that norm, that principle, that thing that isn't necessarily codified into law, but is still something that is kind of foundational to the integrity of democratic systems, which is that the military does not exist to serve the whims of politicians and their political desires. It's erasing the line that says that this institution, the most heavily funded war-fighting apparatus on the planet, is supposed to look externally, not internally. And that's the kind of shit that I'm like, okay, it's towing the line. He hasn't had a citizen arrested by the Marines yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, does it feel to you like, Nikki, it's increasingly feeling to me as though a lot of the media and a lot of people generally are discussing when is it that it will be too late? Like, when is it that we've going to have hit that point of no return? When maybe we're then going to ignore the moment where it is too late, if that makes sense. It feels like too late is now, and we're still debating, like, when is it too late to call this shit out?
too late is now to me. I think too late was the moment that
He won.
Well, the point of no return was theoretically when he won, but at that point, you still had the notion, okay, it's a one-term presidency. Maybe they'll vote him out of office. For me, it was 2020 in the aftermath of the January 6th riot when he was still president and Biden had not been inaugurated, when Republicans, after all of them being no, this is horrible, this is unacceptable, when Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell were publicly saying this man needs to be expelled from our politics and permanently exiled, and within a week, they had turned around and were saying, no. If you try to impeach him, we'll vote it down. The minute Republicans rallied behind Trump after January 6th, to me, that was the moment where I was like, okay, there was no political solution at that point. To me, if the Congress of the United States, if the Senate of the United States cannot grab itself by the balls and say, we need to put a stop to this, I don't see another competing or adjacent institution that can unilaterally do that. That to me was the point where I was like, all right, this man, the train has run. And if we're ever gonna A, stop it, but B, undo the damage that's being done, it's not gonna be something that can happen within one presidential term or two or three. It's gonna take a lot of work and probably decades.
Swin, with discussing this point of no return and how it feels like there's just so limited checks upon Trump, how are his sort of acolytes reacting to this? And is there any sign of anyone in MAGA or Trump world going, hey, we love the deporting random people stuff, we love the arresting people we don't like stuff, but the chaos we're seeing, we maybe don't like that? Is there anyone remotely saying anything with pushback to him, or are they all just lapping this up?
If you're talking about people who have any avenue of actual influence or power, including those in Congress on the Republican side, in his administration, no, there is no meaningful level of pushback on this stuff that you're talking about, in part because that was by design. The entire project of the Trump 2024 campaign, his government in waiting, and the highest echelons of his government right now is to cancel out as many as possible, get to as close to zero as possible. And they've damn well gotten close to that, if not at that. Senior officials and cabinet members like Mark Esper from the first administration. And of course, I'm not someone who idolizes these people. Mark Esper is far from a perfect human being, but when he was Secretary of Defense and Trump said he wanted protesters who were gathering in front of the White House in the summer of 2020 to be literally shot, he was telling the head of his Pentagon, we should shoot
him in the legs.
Yeah, which again kills people. I mean, you can easily die pretty quickly from getting shot in the leg. But anyway, I digress. Mark Esper has repeatedly said that his intention from that moment, hearing that, was to make sure that didn't happen, that it didn't get to that point. Those people are cleared out, and they are replaced with people who, even if they wouldn't jump at the opportunity to do something like that, would either jump or B, try to get as close to that as possible to satisfy Donald Trump, which again is just a market shift from the very flimsy guardrails from the first term that kept him from fulfilling his darkest of darkest, bloodiest of bloodiest fantasies that he really wanted to during his first term. Again, the first term, absolutely atrocious and blood-caked, but it could have been bloodier and gorier.
It's a great review.
Yeah. the sequels are always indeed worse.
Yeah.
So to further answer your question about this time around, is there anybody to restrain him? The simple answer is no. I mean, I don't know what else to say on that point.
Yeah. I always do this where I ask people questions as if they're gonna surprise me with there's some magical piece of paper hidden somewhere. There's not, or there's some knight coming in. Nikki, Kristi Noem, she's someone who will make things more calm and rational. She wants troops to be able to arrest people now. which feels like it doesn't make very much sense to me. For one, imagining you need to have quite a deep understanding of the laws upon which you're arresting people for, which police are trained in a way that troops aren't, etc. Is that going to happen?
I mean, it seems like what the Trump administration is gearing up to do. And the one thing I will say is they've been very strategic about how they approach all of these escalations, the escalations I talked about in our bonus episodes. So the short and skinny of it here is that I believe on like Friday of last week, right around when the protests were starting and the National Guard, and Trump had authorized the National Guard to go into LA, Kristi Noem wrote a letter to Pete Hegseth basically asking him for like the Department of Defense to give troops being sent to LA authorization to arrest civilians under Title 10, I believe it was. Basically being like, if you see someone committing a crime, you're allowed to arrest them. It felt in the letter, so the letter got leaked, but the way she wrote it, to me, it felt like a letter that she wrote knowing it was going to get leaked. The language she was using about like criminal alien terrorist invaders ravaging Los Angeles. I was like, okay, you wrote this knowing it was going to get leaked. But invoking Title 10 felt like a very weak attempt at skirting the requirements of the Insurrection Act. And what I see is that the Trump administration is basically like treating the situation as the eventual excuse to get the Insurrection Act put into place. If it doesn't happen in California, it might happen in another city, because obviously these ICE raids aren't just happening in LA. They're happening all over the country. Like New York and Chicago both had raids in the last couple days. The protests are spreading. And the authorizations Trump has given himself to federalize National Guard troops and, of course, the military, he can do that in any state, barring California succeeding in getting an injunction. And the way this is going to work, if, troops start arresting people, is that it's not necessarily going to start with citizens. What we're seeing in LA is that the National Guard and supposedly the Marines are next, are being deployed alongside ICE agents to act as protection. So there is going to come a moment where maybe someone who they're trying to detain is resisting arrest, or like a protest at a raid is getting a little rowdy, where you will likely see National Guard troops, or, if they do deploy the military, the Marines alongside ICE, members of the military intervening. And much like what is happening with these ICE raids, they're going to say, oh, well, these undocumented immigrants that, the National Guard and the military are helping arrest are like foreign invaders and designated terrorists. So legally we're allowed to do this. And as they start getting more confident, I think what you'll see is what's happening now, where they're just going to start accidentally scooping up citizens or residents. And then you're going to get into a really big constitutional issue about like who authorized this and is this allowed, and like what recompense do people get?
Yeah.
Because we wrote it up at Rolling Stone yesterday. A woman who kind of like she didn't like really intervene in the arrest, but ICE came to her workplace to try and arrest her husband. And she was like, I want to see a warrant. This is private property. You can't come in. She was 9 months pregnant at the time, and ICE arrested her, and she ended up in the hospital. Because like she started having like pains in her stomach because like she was a week away from her due date. But she was a citizen, and she just got scooped up by ICE and thrown in a detention center. And that's happened multiple times. So you're going to get into this type of situation where, once again, the Trump administration repeats this pattern of saying, oh, we're just going after criminal, illegal invaders who are like terrorizing the country, yada, yada, yada. And at the same time, not only is that inhumane and likely illegal the way they're doing it, but they're also going to start encroaching on the rights of American citizens. And eventually it becomes so normalized that they can just say, well, oh, any citizen that we arrest, however accidentally at one of these raids, by whatever entity does it, well, they shouldn't have been there anyway. They're impeding an investigation. They're obstructing justice. Therefore, they are also criminals, and I have the right.
Nikki, there's a big weekend of protests coming up, and when it comes to the public opinion side of it does seem like a lot of people aren't massively enjoying the way he's handling this, let's say. Is this going to start to cause a shit show that he can't contain, or at least can't dodge blame from? Or am I being naive that that's maybe something that he has to worry about?
I think you're being a little naive.
Yeah.
As much as I believe, and I think a lot of people believe in the rationale behind like things like the 2020 George Floyd protests, Republicans have spent the last 4 years tying acts of civil disobedience. And I'm not talking about like the outright violence and like, you know, setting buildings on fire. I'm talking about the people who come out and mobilize in the streets to like exercise their First Amendment rights. Republicans have very successfully tied those movements to those pictures of like violence, of property destruction. It's a narrative that's been building for 4 years. And as Swin said earlier in the episode, they have been itching for an opportunity to make that final step and say, oh, you see these hooligans, here we go again. All of those like horrible images you saw of these protests, of like those riots, we're going to prevent that from happening. And so any sort of like political dissent under the Trump administration is very easily going to be converted into like a narrative of like terrorist supporting anarchists are terrorizing the streets to like defend illegal immigrants. And the crackdown is going to continue. And so I also think that that's why, like, if you're participating in protests, you need to be quite disciplined about what you're doing. Like, civil disobedience is one thing. Giving ammo to the opposition is another. Like, be disciplined about your messaging and be disciplined about what you're doing. But we already saw it. This parade is happening in D.C. There's, like, dual protests happening because of the ICE raids. And then and everything that's happening in LA, but also protests against the military parade. And I believe on Wednesday, Trump put out a statement essentially saying that, like, we're going to crack down super hard on protests in DC. The man is like, you're not going to disturb my fun. And if you do, I will make a spectacle out of you.
Yeah. It's my birthday and I'll shoot you if I want to is kind of Donald Trump's new theme tune, I guess.
You know.
Hey, come on. Swin, I'm going to ask you to sort of look into the future a little bit for me here. Not too far into the future, don't worry. Not full-on psychic skills I'm asking for. But where do you see this going? Do you see any breaks on what is happening here? How does this look like it's playing out, the situation in LA and where that spreads?
I mean, how hard he goes at it in the near term will depend largely on what he ends up seeing on his own TV screens. If these larger scale protests and confrontations with federal agents, with federal officials, federal officers, I should say, do continue on the streets of especially places like the Chicago area, Boston, Philadelphia, places where Trump and his people have been itching for a long time to send in the troops, send in the Marines if they feel like it. Then we are going to head very rapidly to an even darker, even more barbaric and brutal place than we're already seeing. But to echo what multiple people have said on this episode, I'm not even sure if it's a question now, even before a single actual live round has been shot yet by a Marine on American soil. Even though we are before that point, I don't think it's a question of have we reached the point of no return yet? Have we reached this area where there doesn't really seem to be a coming back in our politics and the authoritarian and anti-democratic backsliding? We passed that point weeks, if not months ago, during the second Trump administration. I don't think I have time to get into all of the examples of how we have and how much more savage it has made the country and its federal government and other governments as well. But no, we've reached a point where I think the question is, even long after Donald Trump is gone from the political scene, whenever he's done being leader of a nominally free world, the evil he's done and the damage he's done is going to last for at least a generation after he's off the scene. Many more years, decades at least. And Look, I'm not both sidesing it here. I'm just trying to assess what this means if we're talking about a two-party American system. Either for the foreseeable future, you're going to be left with a coin toss every 4 years of a presidential election between a political party that, whether Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket or not, has been given this mandate for authoritarian, unbridled impulse that it is going to continue to internalize in a whole host of ways, even if Donald Trump is not the leader of the party. You have a choice between that and whatever the Democratic Party is now or may be in the future. And I mean, I think it remains to be seen. Although, if you ask me, I'll tell you on which way I'd put my money, whether it's a choice between this like revanchist, increasingly authoritarian, fascistic Republican Party and a very squishy, let's return to the norms, this is not who we are, America type Democratic apparatus, or a Democratic Party that starts to think, okay, we're not going to unilaterally disarm. The country has reached the point of no return. The Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, has ripped off the facade of caring about these norms, has sent the American people and its government in a much more authoritarian bent. We're not going to unilaterally disarm. We're going to open up the toolbox that Donald Trump has given us, and we are going to use it for what our definition of good is. I got to be honest with you, I don't really like either near-term future of American politics. Because on one hand, you have competitive authoritarianism. On the other hand, you have a Democratic Party that says, oh, we're going to take the tools that Donald Trump has given us, but use it for good, or what we say is good. And we saw a smaller scale version of that play out when Obama became president, and he codified some of the worst aspects of the national security apparatus that George W. Bush left it. But, oh, I'm the philosopher king, Barack Obama, so of course it's okay if I do it. And we're still living with the horrible effects of that all the way up to the second Trump presidency, as he's using those war on terror tactics against his own people. So yeah, bleak, bad all around. We have a lot to fear from the future, both near term and far term. Sorry if I bummed you out too much with that.
Well, we've got Obama's playlists to listen to, at least, so that can cheer us all up.
Oh yeah,
We've
his
got
summer reading list.
Exactly, we've got all of that to work through. Swin, yeah, I'm not sure I can say it's been a pleasure because of what we've been discussing, but it has been a pleasure to.
Back again.
But it's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us for American Friction.
Anytime.
Now let's round up some stories that you might have missed. Nikki, RFK Jr., he's basically fired every single vaccine expert from the CDC, hasn't he? What's that all about?
So, within the CDC, there is a committee known as the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. It's a committee that meets a couple times a year. It helps the CDC, and by extension, like the National Health Service and other agencies under its umbrella, sort of like determine vaccine policies, particularly like influenza and COVID vaccine stuff in recent years for like the coming years. So they'll meet and they'll talk about like, okay, these strains of the flu are really going around right now. So for the flu vaccine, we're going to recommend in, flu season later in the year, we should tell the vaccine manufacturers to make sure that they're covering all these strains in their vaccines. And they basically coordinate to make sure that, the vaccinations that health agencies, like public health agencies in the United States recommend are all aligned with each other, that manufacturers know what the NHS and CDC are recommending, and that they're looking ahead to make sure that, like, okay, if there's one really freaky strain of influenza virus that they know about, that they know is going to be a problem in the coming flu season, they can, like, get ahead of that. The other big thing they do is, like, coordinate with insurance companies about, like, coverage and stuff for these kinds of vaccinations. Kennedy fired everyone on the panel, like 17 people. The thing is, these are supposed to be appointees who have, like, set terms. A bunch of them, their terms ended during the Biden administration, so Biden had appointed a bunch of the panel. And, like, Kennedy put out this statement being all, we're like, all these people have been captured by big pharma and we need to reestablish trust in vaccinations. The man who has spent several decades of his career claiming that vaccines cause autism and that we don't know what's in them and that, kids are getting too many vaccinations and it's leaving them permanently maimed. This man is now the one telling the country that we need to reestablish trust in vaccinations. So essentially what he's doing here is gutting this advisory committee, and then he's going to reappoint his people of his choosing, people who align with his visions of vaccines, who, are professional skeptics, who don't necessarily care what the science actually says, but are more focused on like appeasing Facebook moms who think if they like put an onion on their kid's foot, they'll be detoxified. It's bad. There are people who believe this.
Yeah.
But essentially it's bad for the country because one of the reasons we kind of saw this coming was because a couple months ago, one of the major meetings of this advisory committee got like indefinitely postponed, and health experts were warning that if the meeting didn't happen soon, it could delay vaccine production. It could delay the sending of all the recommendations they need to make on an annual basis. So again, in the case of Kennedy, we talked about this before. He's not the type of situation where he comes into office and the American healthcare system immediately collapses. It's that he is going to start breaking down systems that are in place for a reason and, meddling with processes that ensure that the science and the recommendations are good. And in like the coming months, potentially, because flu vaccines do operate on sort of like a year-long shorter cycle. But in like months and years, we're going to start seeing real effects to like public health and the state of American healthcare. And that's scary.
Yeah, it is scary. Chris, something else that's scary. Donald Trump's polling numbers. He's underwater, isn't he?
Well, yeah, he
basically everywhere.
Pretty much, yeah. Oh, my voice broke there. I sounded a bit upset, but I'm not actually upset. There's some polling from Quinnipiac University, and that was using 1,265 registered voters. Ooh. And I'm just going to focus on what the independents are saying here. But when they were asked if they approve the way Trump is handling his job as president, 47% strongly disapprove compared to 24% who strongly approve. When asked, are you satisfied with how the nation is being run, 45% said very dissatisfied. 9% said they were satisfied or very satisfied. And on the economy, 57% disapprove of the way he's handling things compared to 37%. So he's not doing very well.
No, it's all going badly.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, let's go to a listener question then. Now, shall we? Towards the end of the show, Matt GS asks, with Musk now gone, along with him goes a unifying force of dislike within the Trump team. Now he's gone, the rest might start picking on each other. Are there any signs yet of infighting in the cabinet, or perhaps a contest to be the next best buddy?
Not really. I think...
No.
Yeah, I feel like I may have talked about this before, not necessarily in the context of Elon Musk, but the thing that people in Trump's inner circle, in sort of the court, the ones who are successful understand that it's not their job to be loud and proud and out there making themselves the face of horrendous policy. They understand that it's their job to be quietly deferential to the president, to obey their marching orders. And if they're gonna go out on TV, out in public, and be loud and obnoxious about what they think and believe, it better fucking be in defense of the president. The mistake that Elon Musk made, and it's a mistake that people have made around Trump in the past, is the belief that Trump owed him something. It may be true. It may be true that Trump should have felt like some sort of debt to Musk for his help during the election, for all the money he gave him. But that's not how Trump operates. The minute you start acting entitled around President Trump is the minute your all access pass to Mar-a-Lago is revoked. He doesn't do symbiotic, transactional, like you get this, I get that relationships. I mean, they are transactional, but I mean symbiotic in that they're like necessarily both uber beneficial over a long-term basis. he's a bit of a parasite.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'll give you some shit. I'll give you the space you want in my orbit. But the minute you start thinking that you can take from me or you can take demands on me, we're done. And I think Musk learned that lesson the hard way. And I think other people who are in Trump's cabinet orbit, they understand that. They know that if they have disagreements with another member of the cabinet or disagree with the president, you do it fucking privately. Yeah. And I think if you guys remember back to the leaked chat, the "We're bombing Yemen" chat,
Sure.
where people in that private chat, because it was a chat that technically wasn't supposed to be seen by the public, were saying that they didn't necessarily agree with what the president was doing in Yemen. And Stephen Miller jumped in and basically cracked the whip. He was like, nope, this is what we're doing. It's been discussed. It's been finalized. Like, basically shut the fuck up, get in line. So I think rather than seeing fighting, if there's ever any sort of disagreement that spills into the public or like a semblance of disloyalty, people are pretty quick to be like, no, shut the fuck up, get back in line.
I've got a final silly question for you both now then that I've been inspired by Matt's question. If you had to pick someone from Trump world or the MAGA world to be your best buddy, who would it be?
I could go for something controversial here.
Okay.
It depends why they're our best buddy.
They're kind of a bit like Musk. They just hang about. They're in your house every so often. They're staying over.
In my house?
Yeah. Like how Musk's at Mar-a-Lago. Like they have to come stay with you.
And am I their best friend?
Well, it depends, doesn't it?
I'm your best friend.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is, bear with me here.
Best buddies.
What about Marjorie Taylor Greene? She would have your fucking back.
Yeah.
That's the angle I'm going for.
Okay.
Don't necessarily have to agree with her or like what she preaches, because that's terrible. Mm-hmm. But she's got your back, probably, because she believes what she believes. We've had several people on saying that they've met her. I think Casey Burgett, who is coming up on Monday's episode, he interviewed Eric Swalwell, who's a representative within Congress, and said that she's one of the people where, like, to her credit, she wears a heart on her sleeve and she believes what she believes, and there's no pretense or theatre about it. So she was my best friend. Yeah. She's my best friend. You know what I mean?
Fair. Nikki,
no.
bad shout. Bad shout.
No, it's not, though, is
She'll
it?
throw you
and
under a
she'll
bus
get you
any
fit.
chance she gets. Yeah, there is that, I guess. Nikki, what are you going for? Who are you going for?
I'm trying to think who I would pick. I loathe. I don't have an answer. Like, who's gonna be my bet? Like, to let them into my house.
Yeah,
you want me to let one of these people
bestie.
into my fucking house?
Yeah.
Probably like Marco Rubio, but only because I feel like he does his own dishes and is really neat and like wouldn't cause me problems. And he's definitely the kind of person that if he was like, oh my God, Nikki, are we best friends? I would definitely be like, I'm your best friend.
Yeah.
And go about my life.
Yeah, but now imagine someone's trying to fight you in front of Marco Rubio.
Well,
no, you assume that I can't fight.
No, there's several people here.
I think I'm backing Nikki still because we're best friends, and I'd back her to the hill, and she can fight anyone.
That's right, Jarv.
Wants.
I'm your best friend.
Fuck's sake.
On the fight thing, though, so this is where I'm gonna trump you, Chris. You're gonna be kicking yourself over this. I'm going wider in MAGA Trump world. The Undertaker, I believe.
Fuck's sake, that's just rubbish.
Trump. So if I can have the Undertaker, just because that'd be so funny, be like, boys, come hang out. We're gonna watch some wrestling. The Undertaker
doesn't talk much though, does he?
No, but I'd have the Undertaker at home. Like if I was at work and it's like, can the Undertaker stay over tonight? We're all good, yeah. And then just be like to my mates, just be like, it's all good if the Undertaker's all right to stay. He's only gonna be a few days, and then I'd just be like, in all my group chats, just be like, the Undertaker's hanging out this weekend. Are you down?
And are you calling him the Undertaker to his face?
Yeah, and that's like a siren call to your mates. All those mates that you haven't seen who are hard to get hold of, they're coming for the Undertaker. So I'm picking the Undertaker.
And technically, little bit of a zombie as well. So full circle back to the start there.
Zombie, zombie, zombie. Hey.
Stop that.
Right. If you want to ask us questions, you can. You can go onto our Patreon and join the community chat tier, which is the £5 and above tier, and you can send them in to us. There's a link in the show notes, or go to patreon.com/American Friction to sign up. That brings us to the end of this episode of American Friction. Thank you very much, Nikki.
American Friction.
Oh, nice.
Thank you for being here.
You're real nice. Chris, you've got to sing.
I'm not going to sing.
Go on.
No. Thank you.
All right. American Friction, thank you for being here. Oh,
Fuck
that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go really American. Simon, sing to me.
No.
Thank you.
Absolutely not.
Oh, yeah, Simon's back, everyone.
Yeah, hey, Simon, he's back.
Hi,
Hello.
Simon.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you.
Big week for us here as well. We've done
Bigly.
like 15
I know,
podcasts.
so many episodes.
I know. It's
Yeah,
been
so-
a bigly weekly.
Listeners, if you missed any of those, go and check them out. Some great podcasts on what's going on in LA.
Nice. Nice
Oh,
plug-in from
look at Simon
Simon.
hosting the
He's
podcast
nailed
now.
it. He's
Hell yeah.
nailed it, actually.
Incredible.
Well, a quick reminder, if you want to hear more from us, you can, and there's plenty of episodes this week, so go back and listen to them all. Back us on Patreon if you can, we'd really appreciate it. If you can't, do make sure you go rate, review, and subscribe. Very importantly, subscribe, so you never miss an episode of American Friction. If you miss one, I'll know, and The Undertaker is my best friend. So watch out. Thank you. Bye.
See ya.